You're listening to an event from the U.S. Institute of Peace, part of the USIP podcast network. For more information about our work around the world, visit usip.org and check us out on social media.
Welcome to today's webinar on cyber scams and human trafficking in Cambodia and Vietnam, hosted by the U.S. Institute of Peace. I'm Andrew Wells Dong. I lead USIP's programs in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. USIP was founded by the U.S. Congress in 1984 as an independent, nonpartisan public institution with a mission to prevent, mitigate, and resolve violent conflicts around the world. When we work with partners in Vietnam and Cambodia, a lot of our efforts concern the resolution of past conflicts, such as the US-backed wars in Indochina or the Khmer Rouge genocide. At the same time, we're also aware of the new risks of conflict emerging around Asia that affect people in Vietnam and Cambodia as well as other countries. One of these threats to peace and security in Southeast Asia is the growing presence of transnational criminal networks, many of them with a Chinese origin. From a start in online gambling, casino development, and money laundering, these criminal actors have shifted their focus to sophisticated cyber scam operations. Victims all around the world are being swindled by scams originating from Southeast Asia. Even worse, the scammers entice people to come to compounds with promises of legitimate jobs, then hold them hostage and force them to steal from others. USIP began to study and publicize the dangers of cyber scam centers along the Myanmar border in 2020. Since then, we've expanded our work across the region. The mechanisms and means of cyber scams and the human trafficking that backs them up are detailed in a May 2024 USIP report that's available on our website and through a link on the main event page for today's webinar. We will hear today from nonprofit activists and researchers about the scope of this problem and specifically how it affects people in Vietnam and Cambodia. Both countries are victims of trafficking and scamming, and in particular, Cambodia has become a base of operations for some criminal networks. We have a highly knowledgeable and experienced group of speakers who will share their personal views. I should emphasize that the speakers are presenting based on their own expertise. They're not representing official positions of USIP or the US government. USIP itself is neutral and nonpartisan. We welcome expression of diverse viewpoints about this complex issue. After all of the speakers have presented, we'll have 15 to 20 minutes for questions and discussion. Please enter your questions online on the event page on the USIP website. I'd now like to introduce our opening speaker, Ryan McKean, who is the director of the Bureau of International Narcotics on Law Enforcement Affairs, INL, at the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi, Vietnam. INL is partnering with USIP on the Regional Transnational Crime Program. Ryan himself previously served in Myanmar, so he's seen this issue from several perspectives. Ryan, over to you.
Thanks, Andrew, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you on behalf of the Department of State, Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs, as we discuss USIP's new report on transnational crime in Southeast Asia, an initiative that INL was pleased to support, as well as hear from experts in the field on their experience with this issue. From illicit drug production and trafficking to corruption and money laundering, we know that transnational crime fuels global instability. It erodes democracy and undercuts economic growth and investment. And INL's mission is to help partner governments in the fight against crime and corruption, to strengthen criminal justice institutions around the world, and to bolster the rule of law. So before we turn to USIP's report and the experts here with us today, which will put a spotlight on the rise of criminal scamming compounds in Southeast Asia, I want to review a few key transnational crime trends in the region. According to UNODC reporting, we know now that Myanmar is the world's #1 producer of both methamphetamine and opium poppy, creating a major crisis not only for the people of Burma, but for the entire region in which these drugs are trafficked and consumed. Using precursor chemicals sourced primarily from the People's Republic of China, criminal groups are taking advantage of Myanmar's instability and extremely porous borders to manufacture and traffic drugs to markets in Asia, Oceania, and beyond. We also know that precursor chemicals from the PRC are used to make another highly lethal synthetic drug, fueling the overdose epidemic in the United States, where nearly 100,000 Americans die each year from synthetic opioids. And that's why President Biden and Secretary Blinken have made clear that addressing the synthetic drug threat at home and abroad is a top national security priority, establishing the global coalition to address synthetic drug threats. And of course, the revenue from synthetic drugs is also fueling other criminality in Southeast Asia. USIP's groundbreaking study has documented how Southeast Asia has become a major breeding ground for transnational criminal networks. And these networks, many of them originating or linked to the PRC, are unleashing a new wave of criminality around the world. In recent years, we have seen the rise of sophisticated illegal scam centers in Southeast Asia, as Andrew noted, particularly in Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia. And these scam centers are run by criminal networks who rely on human trafficking and forced labor and steal vast amounts of money from their victims. In a major finding of the report, USIP's research team calculates that the criminal syndicates running the scam centers likely reap more than $43 billion a year in illicit profit. That's right, $43 billion a year annually. And that estimate represents nearly 40% of the GDP of Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar combined. So these scam compounds in Southeast Asia form the epicenter of an illicit global industry. The first victims of the scam centers are those who are lured to the compounds by the prospects of lucrative employment, often advertised as tech industry jobs, only to be duped and kidnapped. These individuals have a different profile than other trafficking victims. They're often male, educated, with tech skills and foreign language abilities. They do not present as a typical victim of trafficking or forced labor, making screening and identifying those victims very difficult. There's an estimated 300,000 trafficking victims from over 60 countries being held in scam centers in Southeast Asia. It's truly a staggering number. And the second group of victims of these operations are the targets of the scams themselves. While the earliest victims of the scam centers were largely from China, US, and the Southeast Asian citizens have become a major target of the cyber scam industry. It's easy to think that you wouldn't be fooled by messages coming from a cyber scam center, or even some of the more elaborate schemes, and yet the numbers tell a very different story. In 2023, US citizens lost an estimated $3.5 billion to these criminal schemes, and this number is likely an underestimate due to underreporting. So I'd like to underscore that these scam centers fuel money laundering globally and use complex operations to move illicit profits from the formal economy through casinos, through real estate, through financial technologies, and cryptocurrency. And in some, Southeast Asian scam centers pose multifaceted challenges, and combating this growing threat will require improved international cooperation to counter criminal groups' abilities to operate across borders, outrun law enforcement, or wield corruption to ensure that they can operate with impunity. And so I look forward to today's presentations and to the panelists unpacking the findings of the USIP's report, because this kind of research and analysis is critical to enabling international coordination. By putting a spotlight on these troubling trends, we may be able to spur more coordinated action. The United States is committed to standing with our Southeast Asian counterparts to support their efforts to disrupt, dismantle, and deter transnational organized crime and online scam operations. And so once again, just thank you for having me here today, and I look forward to the conversation.
Great. Our next speaker is Jason Tower, who is the USIP Country Director for Myanmar and leads the Transnational Criminal Network Program regionally based in Bangkok. Jason, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thanks to all of the speakers for joining us this morning or this evening, and to everyone who's joined online for this event. As has already been mentioned, USIP has been working on security challenges stemming from the rising influence of Chinese origin crime groups in Southeast Asia since 2019. Our initial concerns began in Myanmar, where these illicit capital networks began to construct these massive casino cities in partnership with the Myanmar military's border guard forces in the Myanmar-Thailand border areas in 2017. At the time, USIP was very concerned about the implications of these enclaves that were being constructed specifically to facilitate illicit activity. We were concerned about the implications for peace and security in Myanmar, concerned about implications for Myanmar's sovereignty, but then also very concerned about the implications for governance and democracy in the country. While the NLD government at the time initially worked to try to push back against these trends and to prevent the incursion of these criminal groups deeper into the country, unfortunately, its initial efforts to facilitate a crackdown were stymied after a military coup in February of 2021. And you really saw since that military coup that the illicit activity proliferated in Myanmar. And so a lot of USIP's initial work on these issues focused on that particular country case. Of course, at the same time, we noticed many linkages between the criminal networks operating in Myanmar and other countries around the region. And here, perhaps to highlight in particular the connections between Myanmar and the other two countries where you have industrial scale online scam operations taking place, Laos and Cambodia. The rise of this activity in Laos very much does link to casino cities that at an earlier time in the early 2000s developed in the China-Myanmar borderlands and eventually relocated into the Golden Triangle Special Economic Zone in Laos. Meanwhile, in Cambodia, you can find many cases of examples of these Chinese crime groups pivoting between Myanmar and Cambodia. In fact, with many of the Myanmar military's own border guard force representatives actually owning and operating scam centers in Cambodia. And in particular, one case of this is the border guard force that previously controlled the territory in the Myanmar-China borderlands in an area called Kokong. So these trends really, I think, have been very regional in nature, with the transnational criminal groups looking to build out multiple hubs for illicit activity, whether it be the earlier focus, which was online gambling, or the more recent focus, which has been this plague of sophisticated online scamming. During the pandemic, the criminal actors adapted rapidly to pandemic conditions, and we saw the rise of sophisticated online scam operations perpetrating what are known as pig butchering scams using forced labor. By mid-2022, these criminal networks had already developed the ability to target a global population, both in terms of cyber trafficking, that's trafficking really a global population into these enclaves. And we've identified at this point 66 countries who have had their nationals trafficked into these scam centers. But then also the ability to also target a global population in terms of the scams. At this point, really anyone, anywhere in the world can become a victim to online scamming simply by going online, simply by being active on a platform like WhatsApp. You're likely to be exposed potentially on a weekly basis to someone involved in this scam activity. In 2023, USIP established the senior study group that has worked to produce this report that looks at these issues both across Southeast Asia and more globally. Our objective here really was to look at the implications for peace and security, as well as U.S. national security, which is increasingly impacted by this threat, and to identify policy options for dealing with these challenges. I think it's already been mentioned the size and scale of these operations, but just to highlight here, the process of producing the report, we produced a series of case studies across the region looking at how this activity is impacting really every country in the Southeast Asia region and beyond. In the cases that we're looking at here today of Cambodia and Vietnam, in our report, we found that $12.5 billion is the estimated amount that is stolen by these networks operating out of Cambodia. Sadly, though, the costs are much, much greater than just these illicit funds that are being stolen by the scam syndicates. There's also massive social costs for the people of Cambodia and beyond, as well as the individuals that are trafficked into the scam centers that now are spread across Cambodia. I think, as we'll find out from some of the discussions here today, the case of Cambodia, you have both large-scale scam compounds as well as diffused scamming operations that are taking place at this point really all across the entire country. But we do hear of almost weekly cases of suicides occurring inside of the scam compounds. We hear about cases of armed violence openly on the streets in a wide range of cities across Cambodia. So you can really see ways in which the security, both human security as well as the broader security of the country, has been deeply impacted by this phenomenon. Turning then to the other country that we're looking at here, Vietnam has been impacted much more as a frontline country. So Vietnam's borders are surrounded by these criminal enclaves. The security of Vietnam's borders have been deeply impacted. You've also seen where tens of thousands of Vietnamese nationals have been trafficked across borders, all the way up to the China-Myanmar border, where over 1,000 Vietnamese were discovered in the Kokong territory following the collapse of a couple of scam syndicates up in that territory towards the end of last year. There are other ways, though, in which Vietnam has been impacted. More recently, these Chinese origin crime groups have been really looking to establish a foothold in Vietnam, to try to turn Vietnam into a hub for online scamming activity. As evidence of this, we saw in June of this year, just a few weeks ago, that Vietnamese police identified 5 scam hubs that were being developed by Chinese criminal actors in Ho Chi Minh City. Fortunately, Vietnamese police were able to crack down, arrest some of the key suspects, and hand these individuals over to the Chinese police. But this does illustrate the ways in which these transnational criminal networks are trying to gain more of a foothold in Vietnam, impacting Vietnam's security. Meanwhile, another trend that we're also seeing is that different criminal organizations in Vietnam are being brought into this criminal activity into neighboring countries. They're learning more about these pig butchering scams and about the different methodologies. And this is a broader trend that we're seeing, where criminal groups around the world are starting to adapt the methodologies that are being used by these Chinese origin crime groups, rolling out new forms of equally lethal types of pig butchering scams and other sophisticated online scams that are targeting people in many different languages. So increasingly, you're seeing many more of these scams targeting Vietnamese victims in the Vietnamese language. I think a key finding of USIP's recent report is the need for countries around the world really to take this issue much more seriously, to look at how they can build out whole of government responses to deal with what is increasingly one of the primary security threats facing not only Southeast Asia, but facing all of the globe. Along with this, because of the ability of transnational criminals to stay at the forefront of technology, to stay 2 or 3 steps ahead of law enforcement, and also to pivot easily across borders. When law enforcement cracks down in one country, they pop up in another country. So another recommendation of the report is for the need of a dramatic expansion of international cooperation to deal with these growing security threats. I think in the remaining time, we'll have opportunities to dive much deeper into the case studies of Vietnam and Cambodia. But I wanted to highlight a few of these high-level findings, as well as to discuss some of the trends that we're seeing in terms of the PRC origin crime groups trying to build additional influence in Vietnam and their expanding influence across Cambodia. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan and Jason, for your scene-setting remarks. And we will now turn to a more in-depth look at impacts and solutions as regards Vietnam and Cambodia. For each country, we've invited a leading nonprofit human rights activist to present about the situation. And then we have researchers who will be commenting on the situation from their experience, and then we'll move to Q&A. So our first presenter is Diep Vuong. She is the co-founder and board president of the Pacific Links Foundation, which is a Vietnamese-American-led nonprofit based in California. Pacific Links has more than 20 years of experience preventing trafficking and helping survivors. Their programs empower youth and women through improving life skills, raising self-awareness, and bringing new knowledge and opportunities. Diep was born in Vietnam, came to the U.S. on a boat in 1980, later earned degrees from Harvard and San Jose State Universities. She founded Pacific Links in 2001 and was named Global Citizen of the Year in 2018, among other awards. So welcome, Diep Vuong. Glad to have you here with USIP.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everyone. First of all, I just want to say, express my thanks to USIP, the organizers, and our panelists here for the opportunity to speak today. As Andrew mentioned, Pacific Links Foundation is a 501c3 U.S. NGO working on the issue of modern slavery in Vietnam since 2005, long before this issue is front and center, the way it is the past decade. We work mainly on the prevention side. And so we follow the footprints of Vietnamese migrant workers, the young people from their home in the remote villages in Vietnam. And then in this globalized economy, little that we know that we will have to support them, the Vietnamese migrants, and the responders who work with them all over the world, from Saudi Arabia to Southeast Asia, to Western, Eastern Europe, to the UK, to the US. What we have seen here, and I want to talk a little bit about the push and pull factors and the risk that the Vietnamese young people face today. And I also, most importantly, I want to talk about the effort that must be made to prevent these tragedies. In the context of the USAP alarming report on scam centers, I want to tell you the story of Ngọc. This fake name, a survivor of the Cambodian scam center in Sihanouk. That are actually not addressed today. So Ngọc was a young mother of 21 during COVID lockdown in 2021. So she wanted to cross border to sell her kidney because she knew she had a little baby. She couldn't possibly go to work. So she was online and they say, okay, you can go and sell your kidney. It'll take you a week and then you come back to Vietnam, you have $5,000. So she left, and then of course, then she immediately got sent to these scam centers, and she was enslaved there for more than 7 months. She's tortured by electric instruments and raped. And you can imagine, I mean, in the scam centers of thousands and thousands of people, and there are very few women. So what do you think is happening to the women in there? She was taught and told to scam people online. So when she did not deliver her quota, she was tortured. She was told that she would be beaten up And she was even told that sometimes, they accidentally kill people, they over torture them, and then they'll drop them from the 5th floor down and say that somebody jumped. So Ngọc was glad to finally be rescued and return to her mother and son at the end of 2022. So as you know, Vietnam has become an important node in the world global supply chain, and mainly because of the labor force that Vietnam has. Post-COVID, economic recovery is far from complete right now. No job and no certainty even when you get a job. So this is a kind of background that we're looking at. There's an increase in fake news, an increase in scam recruitment. So Jason had mentioned that Vietnam is becoming one of the hub. I think it's well on its way, already a big hub of fake news and scam recruitment. The echo chambers that these young people who are glued to social media and each other take on bigger and bigger risk as a choice to build their future dwindle. So it's really a very fascinating, and sad case, because right now in Vietnam, I was told out of the 100 million people, we have 75 million Facebook account, and we also have 75 million Zalo account. So that means that the people in Vietnam are very, very glued to social media. So another issue I want to talk about is the spread of trafficking and smuggling and trafficking. So if you all can remember back in October 2019, where there was a lorry with 39 people who died, Vietnamese migrants who died suffocated in the lorry in Essex, England. That 39 people came from 5 provinces. So in 2022, we were asked to assist. We were asked by the government to assist almost 100 people. And those people came from 22 provinces in October 2022. So we knew, we're looking at the case like that, we really know that that the spread is intense, and it's actually all over Vietnam. The people are extremely at risk. We also want to tell you about the issue of victim identification. So in the report, you mentioned a video across the border in Cambodia of a scam centers where people ran away from it. The report outlined very complicated political networks that coexist with these transnational organized crime networks. So if you think about the balance of power between the migrant workers who often are from disadvantaged backgrounds and then this whole structure, so you can see that there is no way that the people have any way to really safeguard themselves against this structure. Once they come back to Vietnam, in order to come back to Vietnam, many of these young people must pay a big ransom to the tune of 5,000, 10,000 to the people who own them. So this leads to another type of debt bondage. And what happens is that when you face with this debt bondage and coming back home, there's a need to take even greater risk, including becoming undocumented migrants and recruiters themselves. So it should not be a surprise to people that there are more Vietnamese migrant workers at the doorstep in UK, in France, throughout Europe right now, in Australia and New Zealand. They're bewildered and they're asking for help. And even in the US, there's been an increase in number of people who are coming there. On a kind of happier note, I want to say that almost 2 years since her return, Ngọc is still bouncing from job to job, but she has a very good support from her parents. And because she listened to us and her parents listened to us and trusted us, they did not pay the ransom. And that has greatly helped her family to continue to support her and not to be in the debt bondage. the USIP report talks about the money generated by these scams from victims. I want to also talk about the money that many of these victims themselves have paid into their own enslavement. Against this reality, what do we at Pacific Links Foundation have been able to do? So outside of our reintegration services in community and at our shelter in Lao Cai, we also offer life skill training to youth through online and in-person camps. We do a tremendous number of outreach in community and schools. And we also created an app to keep migrant workers up to date on the latest news on scam and migration. In factories in Vietnam, we deliver fact training for workers and managers on forced labor and scam tricks. In other words, in this sea of fake news, we aim to become a trusted source of information. But I want to say that in order to be and remain a trusted source of information, we realize that we must link up with other trusted source of information in this room and beyond. We all must work together to make this commitment to prevent, a commitment that cannot be just this year or next year, but it must be in the long term, and especially in collaboration with each other. I noticed that in the report, the calls for action on the part of CSO were not coordinated campaign efforts by the U.S. government, but it's kind of two different silos. And I hope that that's not what you meant to do, but there should be a support and coordinated effort from the U.S. government to the local NGOs that are working in the field to prevent this from happening. I also want to applaud the report for insisting on prevention. Sustained preventative efforts are what's needed to get ahead of these growing threats. The revenue of this transnational crime scene is in the billions of dollars. So what we need to do is to band together, and that's the only way to hope to turn this destructive tide around. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Diep, for that dive into what the situation looks like for Vietnamese young people who are either going or coming back from trafficking. So we'll now hear more about the situation in Cambodia, and it's my pleasure to introduce Mu Sochua, who's a Cambodian politician and human rights activist. She formed the first women's organization in Cambodia called Khmer in 1989, and later became Minister of Women's and Veterans Affairs, a member of parliament, and vice president of the Cambodia National Rescue Party until it was dissolved in 2017. She's continued to work to stop human trafficking, domestic violence, and worker exploitation. In September 2023, she co-founded the Khmer Movement for Democracy with the aim of promoting democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. So Sochua, it's really a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and good evening to you all. I am speaking from Providence, so it's almost 10 p.m., but I feel very fortunate to be part of this webinar. It is extremely, extremely important that we start with this webinar and that we don't stop here. It needs to go on much further than this. When I read the report by the U.S. Institute of Peace in May of this year, I was so relieved that there is such a report. Why? Because the Khmer Movement for Democracy, we operate from outside of Cambodia because that is safer. It's much safer. The regime cannot dissolve us. The regime cannot put us in jail. The regime cannot prosecute us. It is important that we take this report from USIP seriously, and the comments that we're making at this webinar, the make it so that it goes way up to the policymakers, way up to the lawmakers of all countries. I want to go back a bit farther than this. Andrew, you mentioned that I was Minister for Women's Affairs. Yes, I was from 1998 to 2004. When I was minister, then the Ministry for Women's Affairs championed. Our work was really on human trafficking, going after the traffickers, after saving the victims, the survivors, providing the survivors who are young women, who are even children. You know that at that time, yes, it was human trafficking. And we went to, it was a smaller scale. It was around Cambodia, maybe to Vietnam, to Thailand. It was just around these three countries. Of course, Cambodia was the supply force country, and the targets were the poorest of the poor, the families who could not afford anything and had to sell their young children, especially the girls. Today is different. We're talking about cyber slavery in Southeast Asia. And according to the 2023 UN Office of Drugs and Crime, it may constitute the cyber slavery that we're talking about, that is in the report of USIP. It may constitute one of the largest coordinated trafficking in person operation in history. So we're talking about organized crime. We're talking about operations. So in Cambodia, I want to talk about three levels. One, what does it mean to us as Cambodians, as Khmer, the Khmer people, the everyday life of our people affected by the cyber slavery? And then I want to talk about the political and human rights situation in Cambodia that contributes to this expansion of this and protection of the cybercrime. And I want to talk about how to deal with it, that I don't think it is well covered in the report, because it has to go way up, not way down. To Cambodia, to the Cambodian people, the Khmer people, Sihanoukville, the Koh Pong, these provinces are the most beautiful provinces along the coast. When I was a child growing up in Cambodia, and when I was a mother taking my children to the sea resort of Sihanoukville, it was really the place for family. It was a place where this beautiful sand beaches of Cambodia, it's a pride of our nation, of our country, and everyone could go there. But slowly, Koh Pong and Sihanoukville became it became stranger and stranger. We could no longer recognize our country. And in many places today where these centers are, we don't recognize the country anymore. Why? Because those parts of Cambodia are totally now owned by China. That is the aspect that has not been talked about. Very little on the presence, the military presence, the mafia presence, the crimes from China. It is affecting people. It is affecting the soul, the spirit of a whole nation. We don't recognize Cambodia anymore. I think earlier you mentioned that the Chinese people kidnapping each other on the street of Phnom Penh. We don't recognize Phnom Penh. And the Cambodian police are so afraid of this Chinese mafia because they know that the Chinese mafia don't operate alone. The Chinese mafia, that's the second part of my presentation, the protection of the Chinese mafia. The Chinese mafia is totally protected by the Prime Minister, his father, Hun Sen, who is still the Prime Minister as far as we are concerned, and the Prime Minister, his son. There's no way that cybercrime in Cambodia that generates over $12 billion in Cambodia, that has over 100,000 victims housed in Cambodia in these big casinos, can be undetected without the direct protection, direct involvement of Hun Sen, Hun Manet, and the top leadership of Cambodia. That has to be said, and that has to be clear. It has to be clear. Cambodia, the cybercrime in Cambodia is the fastest. The casinos, these big centers, are actually owned by the Chinese mafia as well as by the tycoons who are Cambodians. These tycoons are senators. Like Senator Lee Yong-pat, he's so well known. It's in your report. It's in the report of the U.S. Trafficking report. The names are there. A senator, and he's not the only one, who is also the treasurer of the Cambodian People's Party, which is the party, the CPP, the regime. Can you imagine? The senator, his name is all over the place. He's not just about his cybercrime. He is all over the place. Money laundering, exploitation of natural resources. He is right next with the Hun family. And he's not alone. And that should be the focus when we talk about intervention. The second part of the protection that I want to talk about is the number of these Chinese mafia that have now obtained Khmer citizenship. These Chinese mafia members of the leaders are Khmer citizens. And just recently, they were arrested in Singapore, not one time, not twice, more than maybe 3 or 4 times in this year alone. And they hold many passports. One of them is Cambodian passport. And they are reported to go back. They reported to deported back to Cambodia. How did they get these passports? Through the Ministry of Interior. The Ministry of Interior has different bureaus, and Hun Sen has divided these different bureaus into for the cybercrime into an anti-gambling task force, and the task force is protected. It's all run by high-ranking officials, even the national police, the head of the national police. So it is, if we want to address the issue, we have to go after these high-ranking officials. And then the U.S. and other countries who are inside Cambodia, who is concerned about their security, the security risk of Cambodia as well. It is really time that we have coordinated, targeted sanctions and go after the wealth of Hun Sen, of his cronies, of his family, of his tycoons. And we have tried for years to alert the UK government because the Deputy Prime Minister, Nhat Savuon, is in the UK with his wealth. The nephew of Hun Sen, Hun To, it protects The Chinese mafia. It's all there. It's in the report. What are we waiting for? I think it is serious that we dare take a mission that to go up where the real problem is, and to just continue to provide small training to police, to small ranking officials. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. So for me from Cambodia at this point.
Great. Thank you very much for your personal sharing and response to USIP's report. So we're now going to turn to Dr. Hai Teng Luong, who is a lecturer in criminology at Griffith University in Australia. He's a member of the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime and a senior researcher at the Institute for Asian Crime and Security. Dr. Hai has spent 20 years researching and teaching in police institutions in mainland Southeast Asia, especially Vietnam. He has a master's and PhD from Australia, and his latest book is Transnational Drug Trafficking Across the Vietnam and Laos Border. So Dr. Hai, so glad you can join us today, and we welcome your comments on what we've heard about both Vietnam and Cambodia.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Can I share my screen? Can you see my screen also? Oh, good. Yeah, thank you very the kind invitation from USIP, and I'm quite expressing personally from the listen. It's a quite different story from the two activists from the Cambodia, Ms. Sochua, and it's a real story from the Diep Vuong. And yeah, really emotion, because myself, as Andrew introduction, I'm a researcher, I'm criminologist. Therefore, I bring my quite little bit technical and professional lens. I use a criminology perspective in order to provide some very briefly information and explain and how do we know the nature of scam fox Vietnamese labor run by the Chinese cyber animal crimes. Thank you again with the USIP organized very important webinar. First of all, I would like to acknowledge countries where I base Griffith University before I kick off my presentation. Yes, as I mentioned, I use my personal lens, which conducted my field work between August and November last year to combine between the mixed qualitative. I selected 10 case study and also combined with the snowballing to conduct it with the 12 police with the different levels and varieties of background. Unfortunately, it's a very limited time for this research. I thought only focusing on police rather than other law enforcement agency. I know if we have a time, the same the social and Diep Vuong go further contacting, for example, with the custom or border guard, etc. It's maybe can provide a broader background. And another limit is from my side, not yet reach out offenders and victims like the Pacific Link Foundation with the Ngọc story, very extremely emotion and real story from the Diep Vuong sharing. And yeah, it's very privileged with the 10 case study, a little bit technical, but many victims in the 10 case study I selected and focusing on. And even though with the teenager under 16 years old, and they are living the varieties areas in the Vietnam. It's not focusing on the city or the provinces, but also some are come from the remote area, including with the minority areas. That means that we can confirm that with the scam hub or transnational relating to the cybercrime not requires IT skill. Of course, also case study, I found it's a Cambodia relatives, the same the Sochua sharing is protected by the Chinese mafia and criminal network in the Cambodia, particularly with the Sihanouk port and the city. And the third party in our study, of course, again, it is Chinese. All 10 case study in behind the scene. Unfortunately, when I conducted this research, all of the big boss, I mean the Chinese related actors, are not yet prosecuted under the Vietnamese criminal law. Here's some basic offenders and compliance. Again, it's some case study individuals or most of the case study they run by the core offender collude directly or indirectly from the Chinese criminal network through connecting and comparing with the Cambodia counterparts. There are different scenarios based on the document. For example, the first scenario is no existence of direct relation between the Vietnamese and Chinese suburb before starting the scene. As you mentioned, as you know, the same Ryan and Jackson kick off in introduction. It is a cyberspace. No need is a physical connection. Almost in the cyber stuff and the online platform. Yeah, therefore, it's also very difficult for the geography identify policing. And maybe the second situation, Vietnamese offenders connected with the Chinese offenders before, during, and after recruiting and selling the victims. Unfortunately, no evidence confirms that any Vietnamese offender in 10 cases I collected belong to the Chinese group. It's quite hard. However, their final target is to sell Vietnamese teams to Chinese online company or composed in Cambodia, who work in Cambodia in different roles. And also offender, of course, again, they prosecuted from different offenses under Vietnamese criminal law. For example, human trafficking or trafficking a person under 16 or organizing, brokering illegal immigration, etc. Regarding victim profiles, one of my participants, they're sharing almost our data reflected on the labor age, who are young people with a strong health condition and doable capacity in workplace environment. As you image in the scam composed, they operate 24 hours per 7 days. That's why it needs very strong condition. And some of them, they came from the rural areas with lower living expenditures, while the other belong to ethnic minority and remote zones, sharing with the border, Laos, Cambodia, and China, as I mentioned. Some of the questions we can raise from the victim profiles, the same, I agree with the Sochua and Ms. Diep Vuong sharing before. We have to identify and demonstrate on connection between the scam location and some missing program between the two countries, Cambodia and Vietnam, and look for any evidence why the criminal network, including the Chinese behind the scene, they look for the overlap between the offender and victims, become their connectings. Here, I use this as a model. It's a case study number 6. It is a complicated case study. I use a criminal lens separate with the level, 6 level. Of course, not all the 10 case study, they illustrate all the 6 levels. For example, the level 1 big boss, as I mentioned earlier, it's very rare, untouchable. The same the Sochua sharing before with the Chinese mafia behind the scene. It's a very hard one. I don't want to mention political factor, but in the real one, regarding to organized crime perspective, in the criminology theories, we use a balloon effect. That means when the law enforcement attack one location, for example, Cambodia, it's not stupid. The same as sharing before. So now they move on in the Vietnam, becoming the transnational hub again, and so on. And the level 2 is the managers. Both of these highest levels belong to Chinese. And the level 3 coordinator or managers, either the Vietnamese or China's, and the same with the level 4 supervisor and leaders. For example, in one case study I collect, some of the supervisors, they are the previous victims. That's why I really highlighted a lot of case study regarding to scam, fox criminality run by Chinese. They are formal victim before they become again with the offender. In other words, in criminology, we call it the overlap between the victim and offenders. Here's the structure with this case study, number 6, quite structured. They separate with the very clearly roles, for example, the recruitment, the design, who are the setup, is the transcripts program, and the training for the victim, how they catch up with the potential victim, even though they are maybe the relatives or family members or friends in the Vietnam, how they can hook and fishing them came and cross the border to the Cambodia compounds to join the scam, the gambling. And I also use the crime script analysis to separate with the quite specific the 4 main stage. For example, preparation, how they set up social media, how they use the simple job, high salary. It is a very, very famous, maybe chị Diep Vuong knows that, việc nhẹ lương cao. In the Vietnam really hit edge. It's extremely the terminology of the last 2 years. They design the job advertising and find victim and look for the roots, and they training again for the previous victims become the new offender, as I mentioned. And they also set up the trust. Most of the case study demonstrates they use also engineering technical to make the trustworthy between the victim offender. Quite structure, step by step for the crime script of the scam fox Vietnamese labor run by Chinese cyber enabled crimes based on my case study. Last slide, I want to raise again, Ryan and Jason also the call further consideration, look for the policy recommendation. Yeah, I think it's in the mainland Southeast Asia, particularly with the countries in this area like Cambodia and Vietnam, it's need to clear for the bilateral or multilateral cooperation. Over 20 years observed, for example, with ASEAN Pol, they not much work well. It's not only second or the political the meeting. It's not detailed for training. The same Sochua emphasize we need to the more detail rather than it's a small training. It's not work well. And last but not least, I think it's enhancing to information sharing. In other words, intel is really challenging because behind the scene, again, it's a Chinese CCP. They still stirring everything. That's very hard one. Based on the Ngọc story from the Diep sharing, I think the last but not least, we should be identifying and supporting victims of the scam for criminology. It's not all the victims lucky same Ngọc story. I think the Diep and her team is the unlimited effort, but not enough. Yeah, it is some is the personal reflection and commentary based on my criminology perspective. Thank you for the attention and welcome to contact with me via email to further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hai. Our last speaker is Jacob Sims. Jake has worked to combat transnational crime and human rights abuses in Southeast Asia for the last 15 years. He's currently a visiting expert at the U.S. Institute of Peace. He's one of the co-authors of the recent Senior Study Group report on transnational crime. Jake also serves in a formal advisory capacity to other leading organizations, and his analysis features regularly in major media outlets. Jake, welcome.
Thanks, Andrew. It is an honor to be a part of this important conversation. And I just want to start by saying that I concur with all that Sochua has raised on the Cambodia context, and just want to urge concerned governments and organizations to really be listening and responding to diaspora voices like hers as we chart a path forward in Cambodia. So in response, though, to her comments, I'll try to use my time to just draw out a few of the elements of our report that build upon some of those really important points. To start, we identified 3 key features of the forced scamming industry in Cambodia today. First and foremost, our research found that compounds are absolutely ubiquitous throughout the kingdom. In contrast with other hotspot countries, as Jason mentioned, scam compounds in Cambodia are dispersed widely, repurposed casinos, hotels, apartment complexes, office buildings. And it is true that the highest concentration of these are certainly in the economic hubs of Phnom Penh, the gambling hub of Sihanoukville, and also in close proximity to key trafficking corridors along the Thai and Vietnam border. But it also needs to be stressed that these are not the only locations. Compounds have been identified in nearly every city and town, in a large number of rural, isolated areas as well. And there are dozens of what we would refer to as major compounds, but probably hundreds of smaller ones. And the existence of scam compounds is now easily, you could say, a defining feature of the landscape across the country. And this is obviously to the great dismay and disadvantage of the Cambodian people, whose communities are now overrun with these criminally linked investments and also the various risks which go along with that. So it's ubiquitous. It's also rapidly growing. This has been a very large industry for several years. Our research suggests 100,000 labor force. And that's a reasonable conservative baseline if you are looking at the last 2 to 3 years. But over the last 6 months, all the evidence actually indicates that the industry has grown rapidly. And Jason also alluded to this, but in northern Myanmar, a surging ethnic resistance movement, sweeping cross-border Chinese law enforcement efforts have combined to facilitate a significant proportion of the criminal industry there to go out and seek a safer operating environment. And due to its long track record as a sustainable, stable host, Cambodia's scam industry has been the prime beneficiary of that Myanmar instability. And barring some sort of significant shift in the underlying domestic incentives, that trend is really, really likely to continue. So ubiquitous, it's rapidly growing. It's also been highly adaptable and resilient. So our report discussed the superficial, ultimately ineffective 2019, 2022, 2024 crackdowns, and how the criminal actors responsible for this industry in Cambodia have really capably adapted in response to each of these. And in 2022, the crackdown in Sihanoukville was preceded by tip-offs and a widely observed and documented mass exodus from the compounds that actually preceded the law enforcement action. And this had the net effect of spreading the issue beyond just the Vietnam-Thai border in Sihanoukville to its current status quo, which is, again, all over the country. And the crackdown that we're observing right now in 2024 is principally targeting Chinese nationals due to pressure coming from PRC. But again, the industry is rapidly shifting in response to this. You're seeing a pivot from Mandarin language speaking trafficking and scam victims now to English language scam victims. So definitely a market pivot, but no real disruption. And it's also really important to note that the common tie between these crackdowns is the complete lack of accountability for high-level perpetrators. So again, ubiquitous, rapidly growing, resilient, and impunity is obviously a high-level driver for this, but actually understanding where that comes from is really important. And so our report looked at 3 primary drivers again, and we've already discussed the first one, which is the absolute and also the relative scale of this industry. So at 12.5 billion a year, that's a significant industry in any context, but in Cambodia, it is truly massive. So this is half the GDP. It's more than all the other domestic industries combined. It's more than all the aid combined. And that is a fairly unprecedented situation where a single criminal industry is so fully dominating the economic landscape of a country. And corresponding with that, given what is quite well established in the literature about Cambodia's clientelist patronage political and economic system, it follows that that industry would then be dominated, perhaps heavily monopolized by the ruling elite. And that is what we're seeing in this context. In our report, we noted specifically Chenje, Leon Pat as notable state-affiliated elite actors with documented investments in these compounds. But as Sochua mentioned, the list of elite owners is really long. It includes senators, ministers, key advisors, family members of the prime minister. And in Cambodia, people of that eminence do have an unchecked ability to bend elements of the formal state apparatus to their private ends. And so that is another sort of second key driver of this. And the third, which is related, is the heavy and sustained repression of civil society voices responding to this issue. And in our report, we noted that activists helping victims have been imprisoned, threatened, intimidated for their work, media outlets being shut down, international media, multiple of them being threatened with slap suits. And all of this is widely documented. And it's clearly served to silence speech and undermine public awareness. But I want to note that this precise set of constraints also characterizes many of the other rights sectors in Cambodia. And notably, you see it playing out right now in the mounting repression being perpetrated by against the labor rights organization Central. And it's actually a story that has been told many times over the years. The stakes, again, due to the revenue, are particularly high in the transnational crime space. So this repression has been pronounced, but this is by no means an isolated response to a significant rights or criminal issue. So lastly, in terms of key recommendations, I want to share three quick ones from our report. First, we called for, as Jason noted, a coordinated global response, and that response needed to be driving accountability into this issue via multiple pathways. There's lots of ways this can happen, but as mine and Sochua's presentations are sharing, there's a really long list of evidenced high-level criminals operating out of Cambodia. So concerned governments can levy sanctions, they can bring indictments, prosecutions, where crimes cross into their jurisdictions. And beyond the sort of clear and pressing ethical imperative to do that, there's also now a very strong foreign policy justification. So this issue is impacting constituencies around the world. It's breaking laws in many jurisdictions, and it's ushering in this really profound sense of regional destabilization. And Cambodia, along with Myanmar, is ground zero for that. And it's also important to note that we really only see the tip of the iceberg here. There's a significant data gap that we're facing, and so a comprehensive effort at a coordinated response will also involve closing that gap. We also really need to be demanding good faith engagement from the private sector if we want to really address this. This hasn't been touched on as much today, but our report notes how various different private sectors are all inadvertently facilitating this crime. And so enlisting and compelling a response from these industries is really important. And that can take multiple forms. Certainly, we need to deepen proactive public-private working relationships, but also enhanced legislation, enhanced regulation around the world is also desperately needed to actually set guideposts for what corporate behavior should look like in relation to this crime. And then lastly, as I close in this last 30 seconds, I'll just say the international community urgently needs to throw their support behind Cambodian civil society. We know it's quite well documented in the literature and also in our report that a vibrant and free civil society and press are really essential elements in societies that have high levels of resilience. And that when those voices are undermined, that's a very strong predictor of organized crime. And so That means both funding support, but also the willingness of concerned governments to ensure that there are real consequences for direct acts of repression, both domestically and transnationally. And in our research, other leading voices have illuminated why this issue is now a top national and global security concern. But if that's the case, it also needs to become a top priority to support and protect Cambodian civil society whenever and wherever it comes under attack. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jake, and all of our speakers for illuminating many different areas of this complex problem and what can be done about it. Thanks for those who have written questions on the webpage. If you have questions and you haven't written them yet, please do so now. We have a few more minutes to discuss them. I'd like to start with a question that really builds on Jake's last point, and that is, what should NGOs do to mediate this cyber scam issue in its programs? As this is a new technology crime, we have no idea what's something that we can start our program to combat such crime. And so that's a question, I think, from an NGO in Cambodia. I'd like to ask Sochua and Diep Vuong if you have a response to that.
I would like to respond from Cambodia. I would like to acknowledge and thank Jake plea for the protection and the survival of civil society organizations, including independent media in Cambodia, because they almost don't exist anymore. They are being attacked every single day. And the latest institution is the Central is the main organization, local organization in Cambodia that represent the voices of migrant workers and workers, factory workers, and so on. We're talking about millions of people that these organizations are protecting. I don't think it is. Of course, I would like to. The only way for the NGOs to function in Cambodia is for the signatories of the Paris Peace Accord. Remember, Cambodia has a very important instrument, which is the Paris Peace Accord, which was signed in 1991 by 18 nations at least. And these governments now are supporting somewhat supporting fully the development of Cambodia, the trade in Cambodia, and bilateral assistance. It is important that the international community, including the US and the EU, to make it very, very clear to the regime in Cambodia that the red light has been crossed so many times. There's no way NGOs can function, like the opposition can no longer exist. That's why I am in exile. In Cambodia, it is very important that the governments that are supporting development in Cambodia make it very clear, coordinate, and then get into coordinated and targeted sanctions, target those high-ranking officials so that they can, their influence, their protection of the Chinese mafia and the crimes can diminish. Otherwise, there's no way civil society can function. There's no way independent media can function. I want to say that the Voice of Democracy, which is one of the the last local independent media outlet, was shut down by Hun Sen himself in 2023 after publishing more than 120 articles on human trafficking and scams. And that's exactly why you can see that by shutting all the voices, Hun Sen and the regime they're making money out of the scam. So again, I say that for Cambodia, we have to go after the highest ranking officials, even Hun Sen and his family. Finally, but the banks and the cryptocurrency exchanges must do more to detect and question unusual patterns of money transfer. If not voluntarily, they should be compelled by regulations. For the U.S., there should be U.S. Congress should have hearings on this issue of transnational crimes, because it causes high security risk for the U.S. Not the U.S. It is now a global issue. It is really not, it's not for the NGO to do the regular job of educating, informing the people, the victims. It's more than that. Although I congratulate and I commend the courage of the local NGOs in Cambodia and elsewhere, but it is more than that.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to this question of roles of NGOs and what can be done?
I would speak quickly. I think what's going on is that, the NGOs are outgunned, outnumbered, and always being asked by the funders the questions of, is prevention, can you document that this prevention works? And we go on and on like that. When in fact, we know we have to go in and prevent this somehow. I agree with what Sochua had said about, all the sanctions that can happen. But I think that somehow, for the long run, we really, really need to empower and support the NGO systematically. And what is the war? But the soldiers at the forefront, and we don't feed them, we don't arm them, we don't give any support to them. So everything is getting very, very complex in terms of technology, and places like Facebook, Zalo, Google all have to share responsibilities. And in this, I want to say that, Jacob, you point that out, how do you prevent this? And how do you get the partnership and the support, the unquestionable support, from the private sector to the NGOs who are at the forefront of stopping this, of trying to prevent this from happening, because without that support, I think that even if absent the the crackdown on NGOs, I mean, we are out there. We just way out there, and it's very, very dangerous for us, right? In the case of Ngọc that I shared with you, we are the one who called them and on the phone with the mother, trying to tell her not to pay money, right? And not to pay money, because we know that the minute she pays money, Ngọc may be kept longer, just so that they can extort more money. So when we do that, there is a risk that the mother will tell the organized crime people that we are behind this, telling her not to pay money. So how to really support all of our actions, all of the work that we do, not just us, but all the organization out there. I think you have to be systematic about it and be realistic and be truthful. I think there's a lot of this whole thing is so complex. You map it out in your report. These relationships are so complex. There's all kinds of power imbalance at play. And in that, you wait in some small NGOs and you're trying to say that they somehow have to be at the forefront of all of this. I just don't think that war is something that will set it up for a good outcome.
Thank you. Yeah, that really links, I think, the human victims direct element with civil society, with the broader social and political context that we're all operating in. We have just a couple more minutes, and I want to raise several other questions that are in the chat. And these are more about regional linkages. So one question is, why is the Chinese government not publicly accusing Southeast Asia countries or banning citizens traveling to them, or at least to stop them leaving from the airport in China? Another question is there any possibility of working with the national unity governments in Myanmar to crack down on networks? And another is, are there other strategies that can be implemented by regional governments and international organizations? Maybe Jason or Ryan, would you have a short response to those questions?
I'm happy to respond to some of those, Andrew. Maybe on the first point, you actually have seen where China has, to a great extent, placed bans on many of its nationals traveling from China to Southeast Asia. I think one element of this, though, is that has reinforced in many ways this trend towards the scam syndicates looking for alternative sources of labor. So as it's become more difficult to bring Chinese nationals into the scam syndicates, other countries have, I think, been hit harder in terms of trafficking. So that's perhaps one thing to consider, is that we really need to think about how the criminal networks are responding to each of these bilateral measures that are put in place by different countries. I think one thing that is also important to point out is in terms of China's interactions more broadly with the region around this. I mean, in many ways, you've seen where the criminal networks themselves have also maintained deep relationships back in China, which have led to the current state of affairs where they have so much influence across the region. I should point out that in Myanmar, a lot of the infrastructure that is now housing these scam syndicates was built by Chinese state-owned enterprises. They received lucrative contracts from the criminal networks to build up this infrastructure. And, I think these patterns play out similarly in Cambodia and in Laos. I think in the Myanmar case, it is very interesting to see that the most significant crackdown that you've had on the scam syndicates since the military coup happened as part of Operation 1027, where a coalition of ethnic armed organizations actually were able to basically systematically disrupt the scam syndicates in the Kokong territory. Over 300 scam syndicates were disrupted as a part of this operation. And that does point to the role that the resistance can play in dealing with these problems. The challenges, though, again, being that the criminal networks are targeting really all armed actors in the country as potential hosts of this activity. So there's also a challenge there in that some elements of ethnic armed organizations in Myanmar have also been co-opted by the criminal networks themselves, making it, I think, also difficult to crack down. So that does point, I think, very much to a role for the national unity government here in combating transnational crime.
I'd like to add something, Andrew. Was that
Yes,
possible?
you can have the last word, please.
Okay, on the regional issue, adding to what Jason is talking about, on the ASEAN level, in 2023, the Thailand's Deputy National Police Chief came to Cambodia, confronted the Deputy Prime Minister of Cambodia, who was the Cambodian police chief, about the sabotage of the police, Cambodian police, when the Thai authorities were trying to rescue the victims. Malaysian authorities have asked the Cambodian authorities to please protect the victims. Philippines, all these victims, the embassies in Cambodia have gone to see the authorities in Cambodia to protect the victims and to resolve the issue. Is this an ASEAN issue? Why not take it up to ASEAN? ASEAN should put this as a top agenda because it's a risk security risk for ASEAN. It is not. This is an issue, exactly an issue where it is not. We're not talking about internal interference. We're talking about regional risk. ASEAN has to take the risk of no longer thinking about everything is an internal issue. This is an ASEAN issue.
Great, thank you. I think this concludes our webinar for today. I want to thank all of our presenters and speakers for your sharing and being with us, and the attention and questions from the audience. Wish everyone a good evening and good day.
Thank you for listening to this event. If you'd like to listen to more events or explore our other podcasts, visit usip.org/podcasts.